Picture two Americans. Both worked for more than 40 years. Both paid their taxes. Both dreamed about the day they could finally retire. But when that day arrives, their lives couldn't look more different. One wakes up knowing the mortgage is paid, the bills are covered, and they can spend time with their grandchildren without worrying about every dollar they spend. The other wakes up with a different question. How long can my savings last? Every trip to the grocery store feels more expensive. Every unexpected medical bill brings anxiety. Every market downturn feels personal. So what separated these two people? It wasn't necessarily who earned the bigger paycheck. It wasn't always who worked harder. And surprisingly, it wasn't about becoming rich. It came down to one number, a number that most Americans have never compared themselves against. Because if I asked you, how much does the average American actually retire with? What would you say? $1 million? 500,000? Maybe almost nothing? The real answer surprises almost everyone. But here's the catch. That number doesn't just tell us how much money people saved. It tells the story of an entire lifetime. A story written through thousands of everyday decisions. The raises that came and went. The vacations that couldn't wait. The investments that never happened. The emergencies nobody planned for. The habits repeated month after month, year after year. And that's where this becomes much more than a conversation about retirement. It's really a conversation about how people spend decades building a future they won't see until they're in their 60s. But before we reveal what the average American actually retires with, there's something important you need to understand. Because averages can be incredibly deceptive. Imagine putting one billionaire into a room with 99 people who have almost no savings. Suddenly, the average wealth inside that room looks incredibly high, yet almost everyone there is still struggling. Retirement statistics work the same way. A small percentage of very wealthy households can dramatically pull the average upward, making it appear as though Americans are far more prepared than they really are. That's why financial experts rarely look at just one number. They also pay close attention to the median. The median represents the person standing right in the middle. Half have more, half have less. And that single statistic often paints a much more realistic picture of what retirement actually looks like in America. The difference between those two numbers tells a story that most headlines never explain. And once you see it, you'll understand why so many people are shocked when retirement finally arrives. Because the biggest retirement problem isn't always that people failed to save. The deeper issue is that many people spend their entire working lives comparing themselves to the wrong benchmarks. Someone earning a six-figure salary may feel financially secure simply because their income is high. But income and wealth are two completely different things. Income is what comes in. Wealth is what stays. That's a distinction millions of Americans don't fully appreciate until the paychecks stop. Imagine two coworkers earning exactly the same salary. One quietly increases retirement contributions every time they receive a raise. The other upgrades the car, moves into a larger home, and gradually expands their lifestyle. From the outside, the second person appears more successful. The nicer car, the bigger house, the expensive vacations. But retirement doesn't measure appearances. It measures what you've accumulated after decades of choices. And that's where the gap begins to widen. Not in one dramatic decision, through hundreds of small ones that barely seemed important at the time. The surprising part is that many people don't notice this gap while they're working, because every 2 weeks, another paycheck arrives. That paycheck covers today's decisions. Retirement, however, reveals the cost of yesterday's decisions. And once the paycheck disappears, only the assets remain. So before comparing yourself to the average American, the more important question is this. What does that average actually look like? And is it enough to provide the retirement most people imagine? The numbers tell a fascinating story. Many people assume the average retiree has $1 million waiting for them. Others assume almost nobody has anything saved at all. The reality sits somewhere in the middle, but it's much closer to one of those extremes than most people expect. According to data from the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, the average retirement savings for American households approaching retirement is significantly higher than the median. Depending on the age group being examined, the average can exceed $400,000, while the median is often closer to $200,000, or even less for many households. That difference isn't just a statistical curiosity. It's a warning. A relatively small group of households with very large retirement accounts pulls the average upward, making the typical American appear far more prepared than they actually are. This is why financial planners often pay more attention to the median than the average. Because if you're comparing yourself to the average alone, you may be measuring yourself against a reality that very few people actually experience. But here's where things become even more interesting. Retirement isn't funded by just one account. For many Americans, retirement income comes from several different sources. Social Security, a 401k, an IRA, a pension, if they're fortunate enough to have one. Personal brokerage accounts, home equity, cash savings. sometimes even part-time work. Looking at just one account can create a misleading picture. Imagine someone with only $150,000 in a retirement account. At first glance, that doesn't sound like much. But they also own a home that's fully paid off. Their monthly expenses are low. They receive Social Security, and they have no debt. Suddenly, their retirement looks very different from someone with twice as much invested, but a large mortgage, expensive lifestyle, and high monthly obligations. That's because retirement isn't simply about how much money you've accumulated. It's about how much income your assets can generate compared to how much you spend. This is a mistake many people make throughout their careers. They focus almost entirely on building a larger income. But retirement changes the game. Income from work eventually stops. Your financial life begins depending on assets instead of paychecks. And those are two completely different systems. The paycheck rewards effort. Assets reward patience. One requires your time. The other continues working even while you sleep. This shift is one of the biggest psychological adjustments people face after leaving the workforce. For decades, earning more feels like the solution to every financial problem. Need a bigger house? Earn more. Want a newer car? Earn more. Planning a vacation? Earn more. But retirement quietly asks a different question. Not how much can you earn? How long can your money last? That question changes everything. Financial researchers have long observed that one of the biggest threats to retirement isn't necessarily low savings. It's spending habits that never adapted. A person earning $150,000 a year may feel comfortable while working. But if their lifestyle requires $120,000 every year, retirement becomes incredibly expensive. Meanwhile, another household earning considerably less may retire comfortably simply because they built a lifestyle that costs less to maintain. This is one reason lifestyle inflation can become so dangerous. It rarely happens overnight. It arrives one upgrade at a time: a slightly larger mortgage, a newer SUV, premium subscriptions, more frequent dining out, luxury vacations. Each decision feels reasonable by itself. Together, they quietly redefine what feels normal. Years later, that new normal becomes surprisingly difficult to fund without an active paycheck. The hidden cost isn't just the money spent today. It's the future income those dollars could have created had they remained invested. Imagine investing an extra $500 every month over 30 years instead of gradually increasing lifestyle expenses. With consistent long-term growth, that decision could potentially grow into hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not because of one extraordinary investment, but because time quietly multiplies consistent behavior. This is why retirement planning is often less about predicting the stock market and more about managing human behavior. Markets will rise, markets will fall, interest rates will change, inflation will come and go. Those factors matter. But over several decades, your habits often have an even greater influence than short-term market movements. The surprising truth is that retirement success is rarely built through dramatic financial breakthroughs. It's usually built through ordinary decisions repeated consistently for decades. Automatic investing, living below your means, avoiding unnecessary debt, increasing retirement contributions after raises instead of increasing expenses. These habits don't generate exciting headlines, but they quietly create financial freedom while most people are focused somewhere else. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson hidden inside the retirement numbers. The average American doesn't arrive at retirement because of one decision. They arrive there because thousands of small decisions accumulated over an entire lifetime. Which raises an even bigger question. If averages can be misleading, and if income alone doesn't determine retirement success, then how should you actually measure whether you're on track? That's the question that really matters. Because comparing yourself to the average American can be useful, but it should never become your goal. The average simply tells you where the middle is. It doesn't tell you whether the middle is financially secure. Imagine two runners in a marathon. One is exactly in the middle of the pack. The other is slightly behind. Neither knows whether they're actually on pace to finish before the race ends. Being average only matters if the average outcome is one you actually want. The same is true for retirement. The better question isn't, am I doing better than everyone else? It's, am I building the retirement I want? For some people, that means traveling several times a year. For others, it's simply knowing they can pay every bill without stress. Some dream of buying a vacation home. Others just want the freedom to spend more time with family, volunteer, or pursue hobbies they've postponed for decades. Retirement is personal. That's why copying someone else's financial life rarely works. The person driving a luxury SUV may actually be struggling with debt. The neighbor living in a modest house may quietly have a 7-figure investment portfolio. Money has always been remarkably good at creating illusions. We see lifestyles. We rarely see balance sheets. And that's where comparison becomes dangerous. Social media makes this even worse. People proudly share new homes, expensive vacations, luxury watches, and brand new cars. Very few people post screenshots of their retirement contributions. Nobody celebrates increasing their 401k contribution from 10% to 15%. Nobody uploads a picture after deciding not to finance a new vehicle. Yet those invisible decisions are often the ones that build lasting wealth. The irony is almost unbelievable. The behaviors that look the least impressive today often produce the most impressive results 20 or 30 years later. This is exactly why behavioral finance has become such an important field of study. Researchers have found that financial success is often determined less by intelligence than by behavior. Most people already know they should save. They know debt can become expensive. They understand that investing early is usually better than waiting. The challenge has never been information. The challenge is consistently acting on that information while life keeps presenting reasons not to. Unexpected repairs, medical expenses, job changes, children, economic downturns, temptation, peer pressure. All of these compete with your long-term goals. And that's why retirement isn't won through one perfect decision. It's won by making enough good decisions over a very long period of time. So instead of asking whether you're ahead of the average American, consider asking yourself a few different questions. If your paycheck stopped tomorrow, how much of your lifestyle could continue? Are your expenses growing faster than your savings? Have your raises increased your investments or simply increased your spending? Would your future self thank you for the financial decisions you're making today? Those questions reveal far more than any national average ever could. If your retirement savings feel behind, don't assume it's too late. Many people dramatically improve their financial outlook in the final decade before retirement by increasing contributions, delaying retirement for a few years, reducing debt, or downsizing unnecessary expenses. Progress doesn't require perfection. It requires intention. On the other hand, if you're already ahead of the average, that's not a reason to become complacent. The average isn't a finish line. Inflation continues to raise the cost of living. Healthcare expenses remain unpredictable. People are living longer than previous generations. A retirement that lasts 25 or even 30 years requires careful planning. The goal isn't simply reaching retirement. It's remaining financially independent throughout it. So let's return to those two people we met at the beginning. Both worked hard. Both spent decades earning a living. But one retired with confidence, while the other retired with constant uncertainty. The difference wasn't created during their final year of work. It was created gradually, through thousands of quiet financial decisions that seemed almost insignificant at the time. Every automatic contribution, every investment left untouched during a market downturn, every unnecessary purchase that was skipped, every raise that became another opportunity to save instead of another excuse to spend. Those choices rarely feel life-changing in the moment, but over 30 or 40 years, they quietly become the foundation of financial freedom. That's the hidden truth behind the average retirement balance. It isn't really a story about money. It's a story about time, because money can always be earned again. Time cannot. Every dollar invested early has decades to grow. Every year, delayed is one less year for compound growth to do its work. And that's why the average retirement number isn't something to fear or something to celebrate. It's simply a mirror, a snapshot of millions of financial journeys, each shaped by ordinary decisions repeated over a lifetime. The real question isn't whether you're better off than the average American. The real question is whether the person you'll become 20 years from now will be grateful for the decisions you're making today. Because in the end, retirement isn't the reward for earning the most. It's the reward for consistently making choices that allow your future to become more valuable than your present. And those choices begin long before retirement ever appears on the calendar.